When it comes to the preservation of Black Miami history, Dr. Enid Curtis Pinkney's name is one on the very short list. Her work has shed light on the role that Black people have played in the building of Miami. It is her lifelong work to highlight and to memorialize the people and spaces occupied by those who came before us, which is now inspiring those mentored by her to carry on where she has left off. Dr. Enid Curtis Pinkney was born in Overtown on October 15, 1931. She was the daughter of Bahamian migrants and Miami pioneers Bishop Henry Curtis and Lenora Clark. The family resided at 1827 Northwest 5th Court in the segregated community of Miami's Overtown. Enid and her younger brother Israel were raised by their grandmother and their aunt while their parents worked for a private family on Miami Beach.
I enjoyed living in Overtown. Overtown was a village, and it was like living with your family. The neighbors looked out for you. If you needed some sugar or flour, or you ran out while you were cooking, you could go next door and ask for whatever you needed, and they would give it to you. And Overtown was just one big family. We all looked out for each other. There was a lot of love and caring.
Enid recounted some of the Jim Crow laws that governed their lives as she was growing up. How Blacks were not allowed in white communities unless they had a pass to be in those spaces. That even though her brother, Israel, was born on Miami Beach, their parents could not put that on his birth certificate because it was not allowed.
I went to Dunbar Elementary School from 1st grade to 6th grade. And then I went to Booker T. Washington High School from 7th grade to 12th grade. And Booker T. Washington High School was just a delight. Joe Louis was the world heavyweight champion. He was in Miami a lot. You could just see him around town. So it was at Booker T. Washington High School where I met Joe and took a picture, which I still have. And some of the other celebrities who came out to the school and who spoke to us. We didn't just learn subject matter. We learned to appreciate our community and to be of service in our community.
Even at this young age, Enid was quietly pushing to integrate her community that was restricted by the Jim Crow laws of the South. She became president of the student council in her senior year of high school.
I remember one time the teacher wanted us to attend a chain of missions meeting. And it was being held at the Miami Women's Club. That was during the days of segregation. It happened, it probably happened around 48. There was one Black missionary in the whole group, and her name was Rosa Page Welch. And when they asked the leaders of the group that was sponsoring, they said that we could come, but we couldn't eat at the Miami Women's Club. So our teacher, Miss Marie Roberts, and our principal, Mr. Charles L. Williams, said, well, that's okay, that's fine. they don't need to eat, they can come back to Booker T. Washington and have lunch. And then they can go back after lunch for the afternoon session. Booker T. Washington High School is located at 1200 Northwest 6th Avenue. And the Miami Women's Club is located on Bayshore Drive, near the Marriott. So we walked from Booker T. Washington High School to the Miami Women's Club, where it is now, and we walked back for lunch, and then we walked back to the Miami Women's Club for the afternoon session. So that gives you an idea of how far we had to walk to get there. But we were determined because we were integrating Miami, even though it was against the law.
In 1949, during Brotherhood Week, a precursor to Black History Month, Enid was chosen by her principal to speak at an all-white forum organized by Ponce de Leon High School. As a response, a cross was burned on the lawn of the student who invited Enid to participate.
My uncle worked for the Herald during that time, and about 2 o'clock in the morning, because we were all asleep, we got this telephone call saying that my name was going to be in the paper the next day, the Herald, about a cross burning. So we had to wait till the paper came to see what they said. So yeah, and it was true. So then people started talking about that, and people in our neighborhood, and they were telling my parents that they need, especially my father, that he needs to stop me from doing that. So he said no. He said, I'm not going to stop her from doing that. He said, I'm not going to let them intimidate me like that. If she wants to do it, if she wants to go to the integrated meetings, she can go. So, he did things like that. He supported, what I was doing.
Enid's sense of justice and equality may have come from her father, Pastor Henry Curtis, who pastored a church in Carver Ranches, today's West Park, just north of Otis, today's Aventura.
My father was an expert on the Constitution. He used to sit us down and go over the Constitution with us. I remember one night we were coming from church where he was pastoring, and we were coming home from church, and the police stopped him. The police said that he was driving with bright lights and ordered him out of the car. So he got out of the car, and he had his hat on his head, and the police told him to take his hat off. So my father, he asked the police what law was he violating by keeping his hat on. And the police got outraged that this black man had the audacity to question him. So he hauled off, and he slapped him and knocked his hat off. And my father's hat fell to the ground. And I saw my father stoop down and pick up his hat and put his hat back on his head. And this incensed the police. So the police said that he was going to have to take him to jail because he was disrespectful. And so my father said, fine, you take me to jail because I can make one phone call about this incident. So then the police asked my mother, could she calm my father down? So my father told the police, don't speak to her. She's not involved in this. You deal with me. You slap me. And so he wouldn't calm down. My mother tried to get him a little bit to calm down, but he didn't want her saying anything. So finally, they took him away and left us on State Road 9 in the dark. So we're out there on State Road 9 and we don't know how we're going to get home, and the police doesn't care. So, but when we looked, we saw a police car coming, so my mother said, see, I see a police car coming, and maybe they sent somebody to see if we're okay. But when the car stopped, it was the same two policemen who had taken my father away, my father sitting in the back seat. So the police asked my father if he stopped by an officer again, will he show the proper respect? My father said, if the police disrespects me, I'll do the same thing. And my mother thought she would just die, because all she wanted him to do is say whatever they wanted him to say so we could go home. But my father wouldn't do it. And so I think that watching all of that has stayed with me and has given me courage to stand up for what I believe is right. Because this was back in the 40s, before I even finished high school. And I feel that if my father could maintain his dignity in a time like that, then I need to stand up and speak up and do whatever I can to make sure that this world is a better place.
Enid graduated from high school in 1949 and attended Talladega College in Talladega, Alabama.
I had a very good education from Talladega. It was a good experience. I had very good teachers, and the education that I received there helped me to become who I am today.
Her push towards integration continued when she and her schoolmates took on the violators of the 1944 Interstate Transportation Law, where she defied their rules to sit in the front car of the train.
We were still being segregated when we bought tickets. They would always put us in car one. And because they said that, like, if something happened to the train, that car one would be the first car that would be derailed or something like that. So they always put us in car one. So when we got back to school, to Talladega, we had a lot of white teachers who had come to the South from the American Missionary Association to work at Talladega. And so we were explaining to them that nothing had changed. They were still segregating us on the train. So I remember Dr. Martha Gibson, one of the white teachers, said, well, when you go home again, when you give me your money, and I will buy your tickets. So that's what we did. and she bought our tickets. And so the tickets that she bought put us in car 5. And when we got to the train station and the conductor saw that we had tickets for car 5, he looked at the tickets and he wouldn't let us into car 5. So he had to take it to somebody else to look at it. We were watching him, and so they were discussing it, and I guess they were trying to decide what to do with us because we didn't have tickets for car 1. And they were probably trying to figure out how did we get these tickets for car 5. So finally, they decided to let us in on car 5, but they seated us on that back seat, that last seat on the train where the motor, on top of the motor, and where the back seat, where it doesn't recline. You couldn't recline on that seat. And that's where we sat until we got to Miami.
After graduating from Talladega College in 1953, she was forced to move to Chicago and work as a social worker because she could not get a teaching job in Miami. She met and worked with Betty Jean Williams. She introduced Betty to fellow Miamian Edwin T. Pratt. The couple married and moved to Seattle, Washington. Pratt became the executive director of the Urban League, where he vowed to desegregate the local schools. Pratt was gunned down in front of his home in January 1969. The events with Pratt happened 14 years after Enid left Chicago and returned to Miami in 1955. She finally received a job to teach at Dorsey High School before moving to Brownsville Middle High School. Enid returned to Overtown at a time when her community was prospering. But segregation was coming to an end. An urban renewal, and finally a highway through the heart of the community, killed Overtown. The Curtis family moved northwest to Brownsville. Enid married Freeman Johnson in 1961. The young couple settled in Liberty City. Tragedy struck the Curtis family when its patriarch, Reverend Henry Curtis, died in February 1967. Enid and Freeman divorced later that same year. Also in 1967, Enid enrolled in Barry University's master's degree program. By 1970, she was working as a guidance counselor at Miami Edison Senior High School. In 1974, she was inducted into the Sigma Gamma Rho sorority. Fast forward to the year 2000, and she was inducted into their Hall of Fame. By 1979, she was an assistant principal at South Miami Middle School and remained there for 20 years. While still an educator, she ran for the state legislature in 1982. She retired from the Miami-Dade public school system in 1991. In 1993, she married Frank Pinkney in Exuma, Bahamas, at the Ebenezer Baptist Church. It is unclear why Enid and Frank did not get married at this church, St. Margaret's Anglican Church, because this church and the land that it sits on was donated in 1848 by her 3 times great-grandmother, Margaret Wright Clark.
Now, my mother was a clerk, and her people were from Exuma. And my great-great-great-grandmother owned a lot of property in Exuma. They called it Clark land. And my mother used to talk about that all the time. She used to say that we owned property from sea to sea. After she passed, everything she said got to be more significant. She used to talk about picking cocoa plums, and I didn't even know what a cocoa plum was. So I contacted my uncle in Exuma, and I wanted to walk the roads she used to walk. I wanted to pick a cocoa plum. I wanted to do some of the things that she did as a child. So I went to Exuma, and it was like a spirit got a hold of me and said, you've got to do something, because it was so welcoming. They were so happy to see me, and I felt so warm. I felt the warmth of the people and the relatives. And I said, I thought, and I said, I've got to do something here in Exuma as a monument to my mother, who came from this place and who worked as a maid, made $1 a day plus car fare, and saw to it that I got an education and helped me to become who I am. And so I talked with my uncle about the Clark land that she talked about. And so he said, yes, it's true. And I said, well, I would like to have some of that land. Yeah. And I want to build a house on the land, and as a tribute to my mother. And so he said, okay. He said, we have a family council that it has to go before. And he did that. And they decided to give me some land. And so I built that house, and I called it Villanora in honor of my mother.
Most of the narrative to preserve Black Miami's history is due to Enid's efforts. By the mid-'80s, she became the first Black president of the Miami-Dade Pioneers and Natives of Dade, an historical society organization. She also served as a secretary for Dade Heritage Board of Trustees after retiring from the school system.
Hello, and welcome to Historical Perspective of Brownsville.
During this time, she conducted a series of interviews called Historical Perspective of Brownsville, where she invited leaders in the Brownsville community from different walks of life to recount the history of the once thriving community.
Dr. Edward J. Brennan, who is Associate Vice President, and Dr. Brennan, you're going to have to help me with this title. If we don't get together to celebrate our history, nobody is going to do that for us. Right. We've got to learn to respect ourselves enough to share our history with ourselves and the wider community. Right.
She went on to serve as the only Black president of Dade Heritage Trust in 1998. She created the African American Committee within the organization to highlight the contributions that Black people played in the building of Miami. It was also through her work in this organization that we now know of many of the Black pioneers buried in the Miami City Cemetery.
The marker that you see in the cemetery was a project of the African American Committee to put a headstone at all of the African American incorporators of the city of Miami. We worked with the city of Miami. We used to have a band. We used to march from St. Agnes Episcopal Church to the city cemetery and have a commemorative service and have an unveiling of the historical markers that you see there for those incorporators.
The marker for Lightbourne's grave was installed in 1991, but Enid and others were unable to find his descendants for the ceremony. 28 years later, in the summer of 2019, one researcher in a small historical research group found Lightbourne's descendants. Allison Lightbourne Jones is a great-great-granddaughter of Alexander C. Lightbourne and Mary Ziegler. Allison's daughter Shelby is their great-great-great-granddaughter. Further research by the same group has indicated that former Miami-Dade County Commissioner Barbara Jordan is a great-grandniece of Mary Ziegler. But before then, in 1999, Dr. Pinkney, along with others, successfully petitioned then-Mayor Joe Carollo to reopen the shuttered Virginia Key Beach, the only designated beach for Black people during the time of segregation. She also created the historic Hampton Community Trust, where she led a 9-year effort to preserve the historic Hampton Inn, Miami's only remaining hotel in the African American Green Book directory.
10 years after the discovery of human remains here, historical markers are unveiled at the site of the Lemon City Cemetery.
Dr. Enid Pinkney also fought to preserve the oldest burial site for Blacks located in the former community of Lemon City, now known today as Little Haiti. When workers discovered human bones during the excavation for the Village Carver condominiums, Pinkney ensured that those bones were put back and preserved the site as the Lemon City Cemetery. During the course of the research, she also discovered that her grandfather was also buried in that cemetery. It was also through her efforts that we now see markers at what were once the Lemon City communities of Nazarene, Bowlestown, and Knightsville.
Who, with a machete and the strength of their backs, cleared the land to make Miami what it is today. And we don't know that history.
And when there was a discovery of a Native American burial site at the mouth of the Miami River, Dr. Pinkney joined the fight to preserve it. Dr. Enid Pinkney worked until her final days to celebrate and preserve Black Miami history. She died as she was planning an event to commemorate the 51st anniversary of the independence of the Bahamas on July 18th, 2024. She was 92 years old.